What is up, you guys? Welcome back to Twink Revolution. I'm Sam.
And I'm Gian.
And we're here with rapper and communist Xiangyu. Welcome.
Hello.
Hi.
Good to be here. Thanks for having me on. No, great. How are you guys doing?
We're doing good. Yeah, it's really good to get to talk to you. I want to ask off the bat, what is the musical project you're working on? Who's the music for? What is it?
I think what I'm doing musically is I'm just talking about things that people who grow up in the so-called free world don't hear about on the news. Basically, I am a communist. I am anti-imperialist, and I guess common themes in my music are like, class struggle, just the world's struggle against imperialism, especially like with the U.S. being the sole the biggest like hegemony in today's world. So I guess my target audience initially was kind of just the liberal Taiwanese youth. I wanted them to just kind of get this to like kind of see a different side of things, because the way that our media works in the US is it's already very filtered, right? But in Taiwan, international news is basically US mainstream media translated into Chinese, going through like another set of filters.
Right.
So it's even more like, I guess for lack of a better term, censored. So and they have like this a lot of times, because it's been like a US client state for so long, they have this kind of rosy image of America being like a role model for democracy. And I kind of want to shatter that sort of illusion. But and so that's my intended audience. But like in the past few years, I started getting more foreign listeners, as well as like listeners on the Chinese mainland. So basically I guess my music is by a communist, for communists, but also for people who are open to listening to what we have to say.
Yeah, so you are probably the first communist rapper I've come across, and the first one I've met, certainly. How did you get into it? How did you get your start?
So I would say that my interest in rap began when I was around 11. So around like fifth grade, in the summer between fifth grade and sixth grade. And I was playing video games like Grand Theft Auto San Andreas and True Crime Streets of LA, because, I convinced my parents that it's not too bad. It's just rated M because, whatever. And anyways, both of those video games featured a lot of hip hop music in their in-game radios. And they actually did a pretty good job. Like True Crime Streets of LA was set in like modern day LA. So it was like a lot of hip hop from like the early 2000s and maybe the late 90s, whereas San Andreas, it was set in the early 90s. So then they play music from that era. And although I went to elementary school in a predominantly white and middle class area, I went to middle school in a poorer and more diverse part of the county. So we'll get into that a little bit. So the county where I grew up was pretty big. So the northern part is typical middle class white suburbia, and the south is a little bit more impoverished. So how education works in the US, like the amount of funding that a particular school gets is dependent on like the property taxes that it's like the families of the students pay and whatnot. So you're basically setting up poor kids for failure. And until they address this issue, I don't know. Anyways, you'll have side effects for this, like underfunded schools with like kids and just issues stemming from poverty. You're not going to have good test scores. And I guess one of the schools in my county had that problem, and they decided they needed to fix it. But instead of actually fixing the problem, what they did was they created this so-called gifted program that's countywide. And as you can expect, it was mostly the kids from like the more affluent northern part of the county, like middle class suburbia, that were accepted into the program. And then they put all of us into that program, but this segregated us from the normal kids over there, and then kind of convinced us that we're special, even though not really. But we are still technically students at the same school. So then this had the effect of, jacking up the standardized test scores. And I think that was the real reason why we're there. They never said it, but even as like a little kid, we were kind of talking about it. And yeah. There was nothing really gifted about my education. And in my opinion, I think it's the level of education that everyone in a country as rich as the US should be getting. Anyways, that's kind of kind of digressed a bit. Most of my classmates in elementary school listened to stuff like I believe Simple Plan, Yellow Card, and I think Green Day. That sort of stuff. You know what I'm talking about. Yeah. And the only rapper I heard people bring up in elementary school was Eminem. But since I wasn't impressed by the other music that they liked. So I didn't really check out Eminem till later. I mean, here's the thing with early Eminem. Yes, we can disagree with a lot of the things he says. He says a lot of terrible shit, but he is quite talented as with his rhyming and his flow.
Oh yeah,
he's gotten really cheesy lately. But anyways,
yeah. Never thought I would have to sort of go from growing up listening to Eminem, being like, wow, this is pretty cool. It's very edgy. Feels dangerous to like listening to him like do a cringe Hamilton rap about voting for Hillary or whatever he's up to these days.
He did say in his youth that if he's still rapping when he's like 40, that we should stop him.
Okay, well, I think we know what we must do.
Yes, this looks like a job for me. So, anyways, although we were segregated from the normal kids at my middle school, like our electives and PE were integrated. So I got to know a lot of the kids who actually grew up listening to hip hop. And I'm not saying like, oh, only like black kids grow up listening to hip hop, but you got to keep in mind that back then, like most white kids did not grow up listening to hip hop. So, anyways, one of my classmates, Jalen, I don't know if you're listening, but if you are, like, thanks for doing what you did. He gave me a list of songs just one day. And he said that he and his dad wanted to download some songs and that he told his dad that he knew a guy. So then I was like, I did know how to, pirate music and stuff. But I was like, wait, how do you know I know how to do this? And he was like, well, all Chinese guys know that. So anyways, I downloaded the stuff. And then, since I downloaded it, I was like, I might as well check it out because, the song titles look pretty cool. So then I was pretty impressed. So then I started asking for more suggestions, I was like a nerdy kid, and at school I would like try to talk to my classmates about like all the kung fu movies I watched, and like almost none of the white kids could relate, but all of the black kids like had seen Rush Hour 1 and Rush Hour 2 with Jackie Chan and Chris Tucker. Yep. So then it was like I was happy that there were people who like some of the same stuff I like. So then from there we kind of connected and bonded, and that's how I got introduced to more hip hop music. And also, around the same time, do you guys know about Jin, the MC? No. Chinese rapper? He's a Chinese American rapper, and his battle rap videos back then were going viral. So basically, he participated in 106 in Park's Freestyle Friday. I don't know if you're familiar. And he actually won champion.
Wow.
And so then that kind of told me, hey, some guy that looks kind of like a much less nerdy version of me, could rap. Maybe I could try it out as well. And around that time, I was also wondering if Chinese hip hop were a thing. I mean, I knew that there was Jay Chou or Zhou Jielun. He's a very talented pop artist from Taiwan, and he incorporated a lot of rapping into his songs, but also a lot of things like Chinese musical elements. And it was really cool, and I liked it a lot. But it wasn't hip hop. I mean, there's a difference between hip hop and rap. Rap is like a type of delivery, whereas hip hop is like the actual culture and genre of music. So then, anyways, as I was wondering if there was actual Chinese hip hop, I dug around and discovered this one guy named MC Hot Dog. He was actually transitioning from being an underground rapper into becoming China's most famous rapper. Whereas hip hop really became famous in China in 2017, by the way, with a show called Rap in China, and MC Hot Dog was one of the judges. It's basically like almost like American Idol combined with like Asian game show stuff. That's like Chinese hip hop.
I'm shocked. There's a singing or a music contest show that Sam hasn't watched.
I've seen the one that had like Damash on it in China.
Okay,
so.
And for a while, MC Hot Dog was the only mainstream rapper in Taiwan, while everyone else was stuck underground. Actually, not just in Taiwan, like all of China. And then let's fast forward to when I was 17 and a junior in high school. I started writing lyrics in Chinese in class because I don't know if people know, but I could always speak Chinese throughout my life. Mandarin Chinese was the first language I spoke in my life, but I could not read or write proficiently until I was a teenager, and I started taking it upon myself to, like, teach myself how to read and write. And a lot of that was just printing out a lot of song lyrics and reading them, and also chatting up relatives back in Taiwan on they use mostly MSN, whereas in the US we use AIM, and going through some of the books my parents had and working my way through them. Anyways, it was around that time, like, if you're in an environment where you don't really need to write a language, you're not going to get good at it. Right. So I was like, well, my classes are boring. I managed to have good grades, so I'm not really missing out much by either sleeping or like just fucking around. So in class, I would just like write a bunch of Chinese lyrics that I thought sounded cool at the time. And also my school was in the process of changing buildings for the next school year. So it was kind of to be expected that certain things would get lost during the move. So criminal rapper Xiangyu decided to steal a bunch of TI-84 calculators from the school and sell them on eBay. And at the same time, I was also selling a bunch of bootleg DVDs to kids at school who didn't know how to torrent.
Has anybody got the statute of limitations on that one?
No. But anyways, that got me enough money to start getting basic recording equipment. Here's the fun part. I started downloading lots of instrumentals of popular rap songs and rapped over them. So it's kind of like, the mixtape stuff that Lil Wayne did and a lot of other rappers did, and I was just uploading them to YouTube to show to friends because I didn't know I was nothing would come of it. Sure. But by the way, YouTube, if you're listening, you should bring back the old algorithm that actually let people become viral on accident. Anyways, I guess unfortunately or fortunately, depending on how you see it, one of my very shitty songs became very viral in Taiwan.
Nice.
And it got like thousands of comments in just a few days, maybe even more. I don't know. It's anyways, a lot of people were ridiculing me with ad hominem attacks. Like, remember Rebecca Black?
Yeah.
With Friday, I was pretty much like the Rebecca Black of in Taiwan's like hip hop community.
Nice. Hey, there's no shame in that.
Yeah.
There's no
cool.
shame. There's no shame in that now. And I kind of even though back when I was like in high school, I kind of laughed at Rebecca Black with everyone else. I'm like, if you think about it, most of the people who were giving her shit were like people who were much older and should know better than to like bully kids like that online. It's one thing to criticize their music and like give constructive criticism, or maybe just, but things get pretty nasty. And anyways, there was this, I experienced something similar, just maybe to a smaller scale. One of the most prominent hip hop bloggers in Taiwan even wrote posts about me, making like fun of the way I sounded, the way I looked, said like, you rap like this, you sound like you have your mom's nipple in your mouth when you're rapping. I don't know how he came up with that, but it's kind of funny thinking back. So 17-year-old me, angry kid, got mad at that blogger. So then I responded by telling him that I beat him with a baseball bat. By the way, he's like 30, and I don't think 30-year-olds should be like making fun of 17-year-olds like that. I think it's inexcusable.
Well, I think what we've learned with our small brushes with notoriety is the most hate you're gonna get is always from the people who wish they were doing what you were doing. It's you never honestly the people who are just like casually dunking on you on the internet are not mean in that way. It's only the people who are like, fuck, I really wish I was doing a podcast like that, or perhaps rapping like that, or whatever they do.
Yeah,
it's a trite point, but it's borne out real. Political twinks are the meanest people on earth to us, and nobody else gives a shit about us.
That makes sense. Like most of the people who have given me shit on like whatever circle I'm in are like people who are otherwise more or less similar to me, or like kind of similar to me. So anyways, after I made that response, I made a music video because he responded to that response and like made fun of me even more. So then I was like, okay, fuck this guy. So then I made a music video of me like just dissing him the whole time, and also had like footage of me like smashing things. I also found this like old pane of glass that like I put in front of the camera, and then there was this one part where I'm just like standing in front of the glass and like I shatter it, so it looks like I'm shattering the computer screen, like from the point of view of from the perspective of the viewer.
Nice.
So yeah, I'm not sure if my parents saw that, but I mean, if I were a parent and my kid did that, I'd be a bit concerned. Anyways, the ridiculing did continue, but it was at that moment where I became determined to prove that I'm not like the talentless idiot that a lot of people made me out to be. So like for a while, I guess I was like kind of just trying to compensate for the earlier embarrassments and that sort of stuff. So
was just so from my understanding, what was the sort of the kind of content of the rap you were doing then, or like of the music you were making then? It was not overtly political. I guess if you were sort of doing diss tracks and smashing computer screens across the internet, it was more like, was there a specific sort of vein you were working in there?
not really. It was like just stuff that I thought of about the time. Like one of the songs was like I took the beat for what's that song? I Got a Feeling by Black Eyed Peas.
Yep.
And tried to recreate that sort of party vibe.
Nice.
But I was also a nerdy 17-year-old kid, so that didn't really work out well. And there was also there was also a song called like that just like pretty much talked about how like I'm this uncontrollable crazy dude who should be institutionalized, and I don't know. I'll fuck shit up.
We all we're 17 once.
Exactly. But now, like some of my like people who did not know me from before and are just following me, especially people in the Chinese mainland. So like, because I've been like around in Taiwan for quite a while, but like I've only been getting like kind of a little bit of attention in the Chinese mainland more recently, and they're digging on the internet and they find like screenshots and some other stuff and like old mixtape covers, and they're asking me, "Oh, can you send this to me? I want to see this video. I want to see it." I'm like, No,
absolutely not. Yeah.
If the Chinese Communist Party can censor the internet, then I can censor my past.
So you get more political in your rap. I mean, you filmed a music video I saw in North Korea, which is amazing. I think
it's an incredible video.
Yeah. What was that like? And what was getting into the communist rap kind of like, and what was the response from your audience who seem more used to smashing windows?
Oh, okay. I guess I'll answer what it was like filming the music video in North Korea first. I think no matter what country you're in, if you're walking around lip syncing with a selfie stick, people are gonna give you funny looks, and North Korea is no exception.
We're told many things about it. I can't imagine why that would draw any attention.
Yeah. So I mean, I actually didn't ask for permission to film that music video. My understanding was just, okay, if I'm doing something and they don't want me to do it, they'll let me know and I'll stop.
Yep.
But they never did. And I wasn't hiding the fact. Like my guides saw what I was doing. They were just like kind of like, what the hell is this guy doing? But one of my guides who I got to know like much better, like would talk about this sort of stuff. We would talk about our lives, and he would ask like kind of what kind of stuff I do. And I showed him some of my like earlier stuff, and he said he was impressed that this is like just amateur stuff, but like doesn't sound too amateur-ish. So
yeah, I mean, if you don't mind me breaking in to pay you a compliment, I mean, you are no amateur. I mean, you're not a SoundCloud rapper. I mean, your stuff is very impressive at the level of production, and certainly getting to pull stunts like this, I mean, was not it's not a gimmick. I mean, the fact that you got to do a cool music video concept was the songs were already fully formed. I mean, you have a whole sort of artistic vision for it.
Actually, that song was the first song that I recorded for that whole album. But I figured, well, it's not every day that I can go to North Korea. I was living in Taiwan at the time, so it was easier.
Right.
My dad ever since like 2 years after he divorced my mom, he started living in Beijing. So anyways, like if I wanted to travel to North Korea, I would have had to fly to Beijing first. So I thought, well, I hadn't seen my dad in like a year or two since I I went to my first trip to the DPRK was in 2018, and it had already been like a year or two since I saw my dad. So I was like, well, I should go pay him a visit. So I went there, and then I went to the DPRK. I was like, well, if I'm gonna make this trip, I should get the best bang for my buck, and I should film a music video there because I mean, I'm gonna probably I support them anyways, and I should like express my solidarity. So that's kind of what I did. But unfortunately, halfway through my trip, I experienced food poisoning.
Oh no.
I blamed the tour guide from New Zealand who didn't properly refrigerate the fried chicken that we had during one of our picnics. Because everyone who drank liquor during that picnic was fine. It was the people who didn't day drink that day that all got sick. I'm convinced it's the food.
Yeah, on behalf of my people, the people of New Zealand, you have my sincere apologies.
So I was gonna film like more lip syncing footage in like Wonsan and Hamhung, like they're two coastal cities on in Eastern Korea, but I was just too sick to do it.
No.
But you know how my upset stomach got cured.
How's that?
Well, it's I know correlation is not causation, but I was there I happened to be there during National Day in 2018, which was their 70th anniversary of the DPRK's founding. So, and it was also the first mass gymnastics performance that they had in the Mayday Stadium. That in like 5 years. Mayday Stadium's the largest stadium in the world, by the way. I think if it's like 180,000 people, something like that, some crazy number like that. Anyways, it was a big day, and it was the opening day of the mass games, the mass gymnastics. So, guess who was there?
Who? Please tell us.
Was it Kim
Jong-un? Yeah.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
So he was seated between maybe 200 to 300 meters away from me. But after that, I had no more upset stomach. So,
it's not saying it caused.
So he cured me.
Okay, yeah, no, that checks out.
So you were asking about like my transition from like making that sort of party stuff, or not really party stuff, but just like kind of more like wannabe mainstream stuff to like finding my sort of my place in rap, right?
I mean, given like obviously there's a long, proud history of truly radical hip hop and politically radical hip hop. Think of things like Public Enemy, right, being like kind of the an incredible sort of benchmark, and then our future friend of the pod, we hope, Boots Riley, and the coup. Like, so what was that transition like, and what was how did you sort of feel expressing that in that medium?
I guess this is two questions, and I guess I'll try to answer them in order. So the first question was like my own transition, and I guess the second question is what is it like to be a political rapper in today's hip hop environment, where just like any sort of art form that arises in the West, if corporate media thinks it's profitable, it will get co-opted, it will become commodified.
Right.
But I have by the way, my friend and I are going on Carl Zha's podcast to introduce the history of the development of Chinese hip hop, and it'll go into that process too, because the way Chinese hip hop arose was because it had already become like this sort of international commodity, and that's how it gets introduced to the rest of the world. So it's like you have grassroots art that became an international commodity. In its commodified form, it spreads throughout the world. And then how does that go back to the grassroots and then form like this whole I don't think it's a simple matter of people around the world are just appropriating culture. I think that's a very oversimplified view of it, especially in today's world with imperialism. So anyways, my personal development from that, like what I said before, was I recorded a mixtape during my senior year of high school, and people were really surprised by how much I had improved in that short amount of time. So it was great encouragement, because if I hadn't done that, I would probably have I probably would have quit. Mm-hmm. So and that summer, but between high school and college, I visited Taiwan to visit family. I was there for a few months, and I was like, well, now that it it was around that time even some prominent underground rappers in Taiwan, including like people who were joining in on like just kind of laughing at me, kind of reached out to me or like, hey, keep up your good work, you know. So that's, I think for a little kid, that's like great encouragement. It means a lot, you know, that like, especially someone like me who kind of was a kid who didn't really know where he fit in, like among his peers. It really meant a lot. It truly meant a lot to me. And anyways, I got to meet people in Taiwan's hip hop community, and like I said before, like because of the way hip hop is introduced to societies, like Taiwan is it usually, like, you know how in the US it began as a grassroots art form in like more like disadvantaged areas, and then once it became more commodified, then like the more like middle class and whatever people start listening to it. It's kind of like because Eminem was like this first white rapper who received commercial success, suddenly like all these white kids are listening to hip hop. Right. And then through that they're going back and listening to some older hip hop. I don't want to give all the credit to Eminem, but you have to admit there was some impact.
Oh, for sure.
In that regard. So, but in places like Taiwan, it's almost always like the urban petty bourgeoisie that's more in contact with the foreign stuff that, you know, that get it, like that are in contact with it first, and then they start making their stuff, and then like the lower classes, like the more grassroots people here, and then they start making their own stuff. I felt for the first time it was an important part of my life in my music career because I felt a sense of belonging. And I actually even met MC Hot Dog, the guy who kind of got me into Chinese rap in the first place. And that summer, I also popularized Jaeger bombs in Taiwan by accident with another viral video about Jaeger bombs. I don't even like Jaeger bombs that much. I just thought I wanted to make a song about it because nobody else had in Chinese.
There you go.
That video is unlisted now, but it's not private. If you can find it, good. If not, I'm not going to give you the link just because it's quite cringe. But as of now, it's like less than 50,000 views short from 1 million. So anyways, after that summer ended, I released my first EP, but back then I was still a liberal. So that I was starting to get a little bit political, and like there was like this one song where it's like, oh, you know, maybe like money isn't everything, and it doesn't make us happier and stuff. But it's like, you can tell that like it's some kid who's starting to question things like I was, but I didn't really have the theory behind it yet. I was just kind of starting to question some of the symptoms of, you know, capitalism and imperialism. But after that EP was made, also it was pretty well received, mostly because, oh, this guy doesn't suck. He's like a lot better than he was even just like between now and the last mixtape. So it was around that time I was at a loss. I was like, okay, so where do I belong in all of this? You know, it's not me to make a bunch of songs about Jaeger bombs. I mean, like I said again, I was this like kid who looked really nerdy and didn't even really know how to like socialize too much.
Had you had a Jaeger bomb at that point?
I did. Okay. I was I got most of the drinking out of my system when I was in high school. So then by the time I was in college, I wasn't like going too crazy. Like, you know, I wasn't like, you know how some kids end up getting their stomachs pumped like the first day they move in.
Oh yeah.
I was past that phase already. So it was I think it was good for me. If you're a parent and you have a teenager, once your teenager is like 15 or 16, you should let him or her drink in a controlled environment.
Oh yeah, no, we fully endorse the Jaeger bomb training for teenagers. Here.
So until a few years later, that was when I became a communist. It was around that time I started reading a lot. That's when my political development began. So I guess this goes into the next question of like what is it like to be a political rapper in today's environment? And to be honest, I don't really think too much of it because, like I said before, under capitalism, any form of art that emerges will become commodified and co-opted. This doesn't mean that political rap can't exist in today's environment. I mean, I think we can all agree that if an artist is always making songs denouncing U.S. imperialism and saying that, Stalin was great, for example, any success that artist sees will most likely not be the result of promotion by big labels and mainstream media, but through word of mouth or just, by chance. I mean, I like to think of it as guerrilla warfare in the ideological sphere. Because we don't have like the big labels backing us. We don't have we don't have like stores are not going to be playing our music, because you know how like for example Nike stores, they probably have contracts with certain record labels, and then they play certain songs, and then you go every like, why are like popular songs popular? I mean, I'm not saying that they're bad, but they're that popular because you can't go anywhere without without hearing them. That doesn't happen with people like us. And I would say even before hip hop became commercialized, I mean, yeah, you had a lot of rappers who were political, and they got big, but they didn't get big through this sort of like big label promotion. I mean, there was that period in time where all the independent labels were being bought up.
Yeah.
Over the course of the 90s, and then like they kind of let like some of the more conscious rap kind of continue, but then they were kind of saying, hey, try to make your stuff less political.
Yes.
There was that sort of stuff going on too. I mean, I have a friend who got offered a deal with, I think it was Sony, but then they told him like, dumb your stuff down, like don't rap about like this sort of political stuff.
So much of that conscious rap was sort of like it was sort of one step removed from being sold at the cash register at Starbucks. It was so incredibly bland. I remember that era well. I was making music around that time. It wasn't hip hop, but I just remember just this sort of endless stream of these sort of artists who'd just be pushed very hard by some mainstream label. And they would always be marketed as, it's conscious rap. This is like, and it would, all the sort of latte sipping liberals would all just be like, just congratulating themselves on listening to it and being like, oh, you just have to hear this. It's so important. And it was the most milquetoast bullshit, of course, as you'd expect. So you have not followed into that trap, though. I should, hasten to add.
At the same time, though, I think under capitalism, we have to look at things dialectically. Just because there are some bad things doesn't mean there aren't like some good things that come along with it. I mean, this doesn't mean that we're giving credit to capitalism or stuff. Sure. It's just the way contradictions work. Now, before hip hop was commercialized, less people were aware of hip hop's existence, right? I think we can all agree on that.
Oh yeah, so absolutely, yeah.
Even though the commercialization of hip hop did end up making it such that a lot of the mainstream rap is about, just partying and consumerism and that sort of stuff. I think it still attracts people to the genre and the sound. I mean, even like the commercialized, you can't deny that production value and like producers and stuff, the way that they're making beats isn't just constantly improving.
Well, I mean, no, it's sort of very, very much presumably tied to, I mean, all forms of music production, I think, surely suffer from this, which is to say that there are people who make music because they want to make music. There's people who make music because they want to hang out with their friends, and there's people who make music because they want to make money.
Yeah.
And those will always be in tension with each other, but all of them have driven the development of every style of music, surely.
Exactly. So I think some people get introduced to hip hop through like the sort of mainstream, like non-conscious stuff, because they're attracted to the sound, they'll start digging and like going online and like going on forums, and like they'll stumble across some less mainstream stuff and maybe come across someone like Low-Key or Immortal Technique or The Coup or Dead Prez,
Yeah.
And it is what it is.
I wanted to touch more on the North Korea stuff because that's very interesting. I mean, you're quite vocal about your support and about the country, which to most Americans sounds crazy. Like you recognize this. Like it sounds like we think the Hermit Kingdom, dictatorship,
open air concentration camp.
We hear about like the defectors and stuff. I'm curious. Even like a lot of socialists won't talk about the country like DPRK. I'm curious why you picked that up as, like, what is your attachment to Korea, North Korea, and what makes you want to advocate for the country?
I think there are many reasons, but I can't deny that the family factor plays a big role. So, you want me to get into like the family history a bit?
Sure. I mean, I can probably summarize very briefly only because I loved the Medium piece. You
Okay,
you
yeah.
linked us ahead, which yes,
Well-
you do have a deep family connection there, which clearly, I mean, you know, your family story going back essentially 2 generations involved families being torn apart and incredible hardship. But I mean that, you know, beyond that, that would be a reason to perhaps condemn the partition of Korea and things like that. But is there? I mean,
Oh, yeah,
is
yeah.
there? You know, but is there political content in the in your defense of the DPRK and why you think the sort of the state as it exists today it's important to defend it and that there's things to admire about it?
I think a lot of it comes from the fact that you realize that the DPRK is used as this sort of political bogeyman against not even just communism or socialism, but just countries that are willing to exercise their sovereignty and say fuck off to the US. You know, that's their major crime. Their biggest crime, according to US, like in the eyes of US imperialists, is they're not willing to succumb to pressure by Washington completely. They're like, okay, you want to do business with us, fine, but you got to do it on our terms. Where you want to come in and buy up our mines for next to nothing. Fuck off. We're not going to let you do that. And you know what? You can sanction us, but we're not going to go down without a fight. I think that sort of fighting attitude is very admirable, and I've always been someone who kind of stands up for the underdog.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, just realizing how much you've been lied to. I mean, I've heard it was a communist hellhole from U.S. media, and then when General Kim Jong-il died, you know, I saw this videos that we all saw. You know, people crying, and they were just like, oh, look at how these people are all brainwashed and whatever. But then I thought, well, even in South Korea, it is customary for you to just cry that way when family members died, and then until like maybe a generation ago, they did the same thing for their leaders. And I don't think it's really a matter of a dictatorship or authoritarianism or communism or capitalism that makes them do that. It's just a remnant of their like past culture, you know.
I feel like people, you know, in the perpetual style of those with impossibly short political memories in the U.S. would forget that, you know, 1997, the entire American nation was gnashing and wailing its teeth and just inconsolable over the death of one Princess Diana Spencer, a person they'd never met, had no connection to, not even culturally relevant, and yet to simply mourn openly in the streets over that kind of death was honestly, to not be doing it was kind of suspicious.
Yeah, it's also eventually I started wondering why do these people, let's assume that their love for Kim Jong-il is real. Mm-hmm. Why did they love him so much? You know, but it was like asking these sorts of questions. But then before that, I was just curious. And then I just wanted to read books and watch documentaries on the DPRK. I mean, and the first things I got into contact with were, like documentaries from Vice when they visited and they acted like total dicks. And you know how they're always like, oh, these minders are so like they do this and do that, and they don't let us take pictures of this and that. It's like, well, if your minder, your guides are people, and if you're a dick, they're gonna be dicks back to you. It's simple as that.
Yeah. I mean, they're hipster losers, like traveling the world, reporting on like forefronts. It's like no one's gonna like you.
Bro, we're about to. I'm about to shoot some ayahuasca here in the jungle, bruh. Fucking
so. I was reading some of the books, and it just seemed that some of the accusations were bullshit. Like there was that book, Nothing to Envy, by this, I think her name was Barbara something. You can look it up, and it was saying that like, this kind of obscene, but they were saying that this one girl claimed that that fellow villagers scolded her for riding a bicycle because it would tear her hymen. And it's like, what? You know, I feel like they're just trying to, it felt to me that they're just trying to paint this country that most people have like no understanding of as like this super evil, like patriarchal and like backward society. But at the same time, I'm like, well, the U.S. supports Saudi Arabia, so I mean, it's kind of like I care about human rights, but I don't really trust you when you talk about human rights and you condemn certain countries of them. And it's like, well, it seems that countries that aren't opposed to your interests are like can get away with all sorts of human rights violations. I mean, like my family's from Taiwan, half of it anyways, and second longest martial law in all of history by the KMT. But I mean, was the U.S. ever against the KMT? Not really. And they had a few. Chiang Kai-shek and his son weren't the best puppets in the eyes of the U.S. Like they kind of did their own thing. They even sent like these gangsters to the U.S. to kill a political dissident once, which kind of pissed off the U.S. But it's like a slap on the wrist thing.
Yeah.
So I mean, as I found out, I decided, well, I should keep an open mind. And then I later got curious, so then I started looking up stuff that was actually from the DPRK, like it's music, it's films, and it was also around that time I was getting into U.S. imperialism, reading things like the United Fruit Company's involvement in the coup in Guatemala, or the U.S.'s involvement in Iran, how that was all about oil profits. Like,
we were just liberating the fruit production and liberating the oil production. Thank you very much. This is house style around here. The U.S. has never done anything wrong, right?
It was like after that coup, wasn't it like the U.S. and like BP shared profits or something like that?
Oh yeah, no, absolutely. Yeah.
And also like Soviet involvement in the Afghan war. Like I realized it wasn't exactly a matter of the Soviet Union invading. I just felt that I realized that my existence, I'm kind of in many ways like a product of the Cold War.
Right.
So then naturally I was drawn to understanding Cold War history. And I'm just like, well, it seems like the US will put like a magnifying glass over these sorts of imperfections, but then gloss over everything else. And it just seemed like there were a lot of gaps. I think that's why so many kids and including myself like hated history class and like in K through 12 education, because you're presented with a bunch of dates and facts, but then you're not really tied together, because I guess tying them together would be very inconvenient for imperialists.
Yeah, there also seems to be a giant bias in the propaganda industry. I mean, we hear most of the coverage we get about the North DPRK is from defectors like Yeonmi Park and such, but there was a documentary that came out recently, and it was about people who wanted to return and were tricked out of North Korea for medical reasons or other reasons and can't return because of the national security law. There's a
in South Korea.
South Korea, yeah.
South Korea.
There was the recent case of Kim Ryan Hee. I probably butchered. I'm sorry. But she talked very openly about wanting to return to her family in North Korea, and she can't, and is being prosecuted by South Korea right now. What do you why is there this complete silence around these people, and why are they not letting people return home? That seems kind of weird. Even countries like Venezuela, we're not oh, you can't go back to Venezuela or Cuba.
South Korea is such a beautiful blossoming liberal democracy, right? Why would they be preventing people from going back to North Korea?
Well, here's the thing. Venezuela is not a part of the U.S. Even I think people who are for and against the coup both agree that Venezuela is not a part of the U.S. Even if imperialists want to set up puppets there, they'll still recognize it as a separate country. Right. But the thing about both the DPRK and the South Korean puppet regime is both consider Korea to be one country. You never if you read DPRK publications, they'll never refer to South Korea or its territories under its control as the ROK. And if you read South Korean publications, they'll never refer to the northern government or the northern territories as the DPRK. This is even clearer in I guess Korean and Chinese, because both sides use different names for Korea. The North uses the name Chosun for Korea, or in Chinese it would be Chaoxian. The South uses Hanguk or Hanguo. And the way they South Koreans refer to North Korea is Bukhan or Beihan in Chinese, which means Northern Hanguk. I guess you can explain it as Northern ROK, and the people in the North call South Korea not Hanguk but Nam Chosun or Southern Chosun or Nan Chaoxian in Chinese. It's like Southern Chaoxian. So I think understanding that sort of the way they view their own country answers part of the question. So because of this, if you are a North Korean who manages to make it to South Korea and they determine that you're not a spy, you're granted, the so-called ROK citizenship because you're Korean and because, the DPRK is not recognized by the South Korean puppets as a legitimate government. Now, because you are now a South Korean citizen and because Korea is still technically at war with the US, you're not allowed to freely travel to the North. Now, the North doesn't really actively prohibit like South Koreans from traveling in.
Mm-hmm.
But if you go there and then you go back to South Korea, you're kind of screwed. There was this reunification advocate who was like pro DPRK who visited the North, and then he made this whole he did this like I wouldn't call it a stunt, but it was like this sort of like political statement where he went to Panmunjom, like the area where Moon Jae-in and Kim Jong-un shook hands. And like in the middle, the joint security area. And then he shouted some slogans of reunification, and then he stepped across back into South Korea. And as soon as like both of his feet were in South Korea, he was tied up in ropes and like thrown into a van.
That is, I think, an interesting point that really does get lost, because in sort of US portrayals of this conflict, right, we would simply
they call it two Koreas.
Right, exactly. Yeah, we would believe there's these two sovereign nation states that regard each other as sovereign nation states, and they're just, a lot of border conflicts. But you're saying, I mean, that they really regard as one Korea, and each regards each other as sort of in rebellion, effectively, or a secessionist movement.
Because during the Korean War, the U.S. views them as one country when it's convenient and two countries when it's convenient. Like during the Korean War, like because the U.S. was nominally entering to protect South Koreans. I guess there's two phases. There's one part was to push the Korean People's Army back to the 38th parallel, and the second phase was to fuck it. We're just gonna push all the way up to the Yalu River, up to the Chinese border.
Right.
I think during the second part, though, they were like, okay, well, we need to justify this. So let's get our South Korean puppet army to like march in front of us. And then they do the initial push because it's their country. And then we follow them from behind. So then we're not technically, we're not really invading. We're just kind of defending them because they're fighting their civil war and it's their country.
Yes.
That's sort of, I guess, why don't they want them to, well, it's a huge propaganda victory for, I think this is explained in that documentary that you mentioned. It's called Loyal Citizens of Pyongyang in Seoul, shot by David Yoon. That's the one you're talking about, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. It's a huge propaganda victory because part of it is to maintain the idea that the DPRK is this evil regime that needs to be liberated, and that, we need to feel bad for all of these North Koreans because they're oppressed by the Kim dynasty, and that regime needs to fall, and then they need to be reunified under the I hate saying Republic of Korea, but yeah. Sure. They wouldn't want them to go back because I do think that there are legitimate reasons as to why certain people might want to defect. I mean, living in a sanctioned country when it sucks. I mean, it sucks when your country is constantly under the threat of war. It sucks that your country is isolated by imperialists. Mm-hmm. And this isn't to say that the DPRK isn't doing its best given its circumstances, but it's certainly no utopia. And then when you're like at a state of war like that, I mean, you'll be afforded as much freedoms as you can be, but as determined by, the people's state. But the bottom line of any government is it doesn't want to be overthrown. And the threat of being overthrown, the threat of the DPRK being overthrown is very real. Whereas the threat of, let's say, a country like the US being overthrown is, in comparison, a joke. Which is why, like, even though the US is a bourgeois dictatorship, we're afforded a little bit more freedoms. Like, we can, like, travel a little bit more freely than like North Koreans can. And the other thing about that is, let me ask you this, people are like, oh, people in North Korea can't travel. Okay, let's look at how many countries are actually willing to give DPRK citizens visas. Why don't we ask that question?
Yeah. Well, and I mean, in a related
also
vein,
brain drain.
Yeah, yeah. Well, yeah, sure. And I mean, in a related vein, right, you would say that every time the Democrats suffer a minor setback, there will be a whole crew of sort of your liberal intelligentsia in America who are like, I'm going to Canada, I'm moving to New Zealand, whatever, where they have good government. Like the idea, these are not regarded as defectors from the failed United States. It's
also like, what gives you what like what do you think gives you the right to just go to some other person's country, like just because you don't like your own country? And then if you try to mention this to certain people who call themselves socialists, they're like, oh, you're against immigration and blah blah blah. Well, here's the thing.
Why do you hate refugees?
I'm against, like, why are there so many refugees in countries like that come from like places in Latin America to the US? Is it because they hate their countries? Is it because they really want to leave their homes and because and go to a country where they don't speak the language and get treated like shit because of freedom and democracy? No, it's because like their countries are like just constantly under the boot of US imperialism, and every time they try to do something about it, like look at like the last 50 years, like how many coups have happened or attempted coups have happened in South America, and it's like they're always being reduced. Their countries are being reduced to like US puppet states, and it's like they're leaving because they feel that they would rather experience difficulties in America, but at least be able to have a little bit more access to the wealth that's stolen from countries like theirs. And I think in the DPRK though, there's some of that certainly. Mm-hmm. So there's some of that, but then there's also like the like you mentioned did you mention the brokers like tricking people into leaving?
Yeah.
Well, why does human trafficking exist? Do the people do it for fun, or is it because there's profit to be made?
Mm-hmm. Weird that, right?
This is just assuming that the South Korean authorities or the US isn't sponsoring some of this stuff at the border, which they probably are.
Right.
But it's a propaganda victory when you get a bunch of North Koreans to defect to the South. But here's the thing, like defections have been decreasing. And if you look at defector statistics, they mostly come from poorer areas of the DPRK. They're not like all political prisoners or like political dissidents or whatever. And also, I mean, a lot of them defected during the 1990s when the DPRK was experiencing some of the worst difficulties that had ever existed. I mean, sure. The socialist bloc had pretty much collapsed, and they used to get their oil from the Soviet Union. But with shock therapy and like IMF and World Bank loan conditions, like Russia wasn't allowed to sell subsidized oil to the DPRK. Or I don't think they were allowed to sell oil at all. I'm not exactly sure, but basically, if you're any country that's that isolated and doesn't have access to oil, like, what do you think happens? The chemical fertilizers can't be made, and your tractors are basically scrap metal. Your industry can't run properly. Your buses can't run. You're basically fucked. And then on top of that, Korea is like, I think it's like 80% mountainous. South Korea is 70% mountainous, and North Korea is like 90% mountainous. And it's like more to the north than the south, so it's not the best place for growing food. So it's kind of normal that a country like that needs to import some food, from places like China. Or, I mean, when Korea was unified, most of the agriculture was in the south and the industry was in the north. But because of the partition, that they can't, like, that sort of arrangements just doesn't exist anymore. Right. So then you're going to experience difficulties. And the fact that the 90s didn't collapse them is a testament to how hard the people have fought to just maintain their way of life and not like give up to imperialism. But at the same time, it's like on top of that, you also had like 2 floods and a drought. It sucks to be, I mean, people in North Korea today talk really very candidly about what they call the arduous march, which is that time period. Like my guide was talking about how like he ate tree bark.
Sure.
People are like, it's hilarious how Americans are like, oh yeah, they're not even allowed to talk about the issues and blah, blah, blah. No, they talk candidly about it, but they rightfully don't blame their government. They blame the imperialists for this stuff. And the more you sanction them, the more they hate the imperialists. Yeah.
Well, I raised in New Zealand, grew up on a steady diet of North Korea just must be the most repressive place on earth, and that if you ever hear a positive story out of it, or if there's even the whiff of somebody who is from the DPRK having any positive inclinations about the place they live or any successes there, they must just be brainwashed, or there's somebody just out of frame on camera holding a gun on them. Except you've traveled there extensively.
Yes. Well, not extensively.
Well,
2 times.
several. Oh, two times. Sorry,
But I want to be a guide in the future. I mean, I can
and not get food poisoning to your poor guests. Unlike your New Zealand bastard. So I mean, what I would love to ask is really like you're sitting here in front of us. I can go pull up at any moment a documentary that will tell me that North Korea is the worst place on earth to live and everything is terrible, or I'm sure another one that will tell me that it's actually a beautiful utopia and everything is perfect. But you've actually been there.
But nobody actually says it's perfect in a utopia, though.
No. I mean, I really only mean in the most overblown sense, as in.
Oh yeah.
But what is it? What was it like for you? And what is it perhaps that we don't see enough of, or
hear about?
Yeah, why don't we hear about?
So I think one of the first things that I noticed, and I think some of the South Korean listeners might not be too happy when I say this, but I think with my dad growing up as he was born to a Korean mother, but his father was Chinese, and so according to the law over there at the time, he was also Chinese. He wasn't considered to be Korean. So then he attended like schools for like people in the Chinese diaspora, and people like him suffered very serious discrimination. Like people, he was called like jangge all the time, which is like kind of like South Korean for like it's the term they use in Korea, like South Korea, for like kind of chink.
Right.
So yeah, he even like got into like altercations this one time, like at a bar with two Marines actually over that. He won, by the way, but but it was that sort of stuff. So it's like you're here, like I've even seen this sort of attitude with like some of the older people there. I don't blame the individuals. I blame they're being under reactionary rule for decades does this to a population. Like ideas don't fall from the sky. So when I say this, I'm not like demonizing South Korean individuals. But I've seen this even like in like Korean restaurants. Like when I went with my dad, like he speaks fluent Korean because he grew up in Korea. He can pass as Korean. But the thing is, when they only hear him order in Korean, like some of the older like South Koreans will treat us like very well. But as soon as they hear us conversing in Chinese, their attitudes change. I think part of this reason is because for a very long time in Korean history, like Korea was this sort of like Chinese vassal state, during imperial times, like when there was like Chinese emperor and when Korea was like a kingdom. And, it really fucks with you if you are, if your country is like still being occupied by a foreign power, like the US. So then it's like, hey, for the first time in history, like for a few decades, like South Korea was richer than China. And then also the Chinese people in South Korea got disenfranchised. So then they became poor. So then it's like for the first time in history, you can like kind of look down on these people who, I guess in the past were kind of like seen as your big brothers.
Mm-hmm. Right.
I think psychologically there's that going on. So then before that, I had never really interacted with North Koreans before. So then I just assumed, well, I guess like they just don't really like Chinese people. But then it's like when I went to North Korea, they were very friendly towards me. And it's not like in the way like in South Korea, like Americans, especially white Americans, kind of like get their asses kissed in a way. It wasn't in that sort of like, right. No, it was like we were respected as equals, but not exactly equals because we were still like guests. But then they were like, you're our guests, but our countries, our cultures, we're friends.
Yeah. Do you mind? I'm sorry, this is me going off script. I'm actually just curious whether sort of your sort of guides or anybody you came into contact with in North Korea were aware of your political commitments, and whether did it come up?
Oh yeah, definitely.
Okay, and what was the response to that?
Because when I went to Rason is a special economic zone in northeastern Korea, and I went there to Rason for 3 days, and my tour group was very tiny. It was like 5 people, and one of them was this Hong Kong based Brit who's kind of just you can kind of guess what his political inclinations were just based on that description.
Right.
He fits the stereotype is what I'm saying.
Right.
And he was just trying to like talk to them about, oh, you guys should be more open, you guys should do this, you guys should do that, and why hey, Kim Jong-un and Trump are friends now, right? And Trump is friends with Japan, so why do you hate Japan so much? Like, if Trump is your friend and Japan is Trump's friend, then your friend's friend should be your friend as well. And then like the guy was, you could tell by his eyes, he was saying, what the fuck?
Yeah.
And I was
somebody's never been to a house party with your friend's obnoxious friends before, I can tell.
So then at that point I was just like, okay, I'm just gonna step in. I was like, okay, Japan isn't America's friend. Japan is America's dog.
Ha.
And then like that guy just shook my hand. But then we also talked, and it was only 3 days, but I also talked about how my paternal grandfather had lived in North Korea for a while, and also his older brother lived in North Korea, and they were both migrant workers from China, and how like by the time the Korean War began, my grandpa had already been in Seoul. He went south before it was partitioned. Like, he didn't go down planning, oh, it's gonna get partitioned. No, his idea was, I'm gonna make as much money as I can in Korea and then go back to China.
Right.
But then because he was stuck in the south, he couldn't go back to China, so he was really pissed about it, and he just ended up just being very sour about being in Korea for the rest of his life. Anyways, his older brother escaped the Korean War in the first few months, like after the whole town got bombed, and they were just like, they would travel back to China on foot, and they could only travel at night because of air, like U.S. air raids. So I was just talking to my guide about this sort of background, and also how my paternal grandmother, who's actually Korean, had lived in Cheongjin for a while. Cheongjin is a city that's now in North Korea. She lived, I think she was there for like a little bit during her youth. So then that just piqued his interest in like why like I wanted to go to North Korea. And then I think he could just feel that I'm like very pro DPRK and like how like, because I would also talk about like some of their theories, like some of the Juche stuff, and kind of related to like Marxism, Leninism and stuff. So like he knew that I wasn't just like a meme Korea boo. He was like, he said I could feel a genuine emotional connection between you and the DPRK. That's what he told me. My other tour guide, the other tour guide in Rawson, because 3 of the people in my tour group were actually from Taiwan. So then just in case they found another tour guide who spoke Chinese. And we just talked about just random stuff. And one of my friends from Taiwan was like, yeah, he because as I was drinking with my guides, like this one of these songs came on, and I was singing along. He was like, oh, like, how do you know how to sing this? Like, most foreigners don't listen to our music. And then my friend was like, no, like you should ride his car. Like, this is like the type of music he likes to play all the time. and he was just like, oh, that's interesting. And then I think he also knows my political views, because since he understands Chinese, he's very fluent at Chinese.
Right.
I showed him my music video that I shot during my first trip to the DPRK.
Right, which does not pull any punches on the political content of it.
And then he disappeared for like 5 minutes. And then he came back with a USB cord, and he was like, I want this on my phone.
Well, and if you don't mind, just a slight digression.
I like digressions.
Oh, good. Well, so I feel like if you grew up with my education, then you would believe that sort of, North Korea, slave state, nothing to recommend it, just nothing but starvation and gray jumpsuits. And South Korea was a booming liberal democracy with just all the freedoms of a little America the whole time. It was not, right? I mean, and like people, I think people don't maybe understand the politics of South Korea. That it was not somewhere you could perhaps have a lot of freedoms until relatively recently. I just thought of something. I'm sorry to interrupt, but funny story is this one time, my dad's not even pro DPRK. He's just like kind of apolitical about this stuff. Sure.
He's just like, okay, I'm Chinese and I grew up in Korea and they treated me like shit, but I still speak Korean and I'll just kind of pretend that I'll just kind of keep this on the down low.
Sure.
But he got detained once in South Korea when he was young because like just some cop for some reason, I think he said like he was like saying a phone number or something and he said like a string of numbers. Suspected that he was a northern spy. So then he got thrown in a jail cell. And then he was like, okay, I'm a Chinese citizen, like Chinese as in like back then the government only recognized the so-called ROC.
Right.
So then they called the embassy and then like who cleared him up. And then that cop felt like such an ass that he invited my dad to a drink. But like, it's not normal. It's in a normal so-called like liberal democracy. It's not normal for you to just like kind of hang out with your friends and just get end up in a jail cell for being suspected of being a North Korean spy.
Well, but South Korea also, I mean, just in terms of literally just the governance structure. I mean, it was effectively a dictatorship well into the 80s, right?
Yes, you had Syngman Rhee, and then you had Park Chung-hee, and then when Park Chung-hee got assassinated, who was it? Chun Do-hwan, who also like the 1980 Gwangju massacre. I mean, I think before I even became pro DPRK, I just realized, hey, like every single like mass murder that had happened in Korea was done by either the South Korean puppet regime or by the U.S. Like during the Korean War, I mean, what a lot of people like to do was they'll like bring up mass graves and be like, oh, the North Koreans did it. But really, a lot of it was like they had these like kind of quasi-fascist youth groups who like went around like murdering a bunch of like suspected leftists. And they also, no, the fact is the DPRK didn't even want to just be established just in the North. If you look at the history, it wasn't established until like a month or two after the South Korean puppet regime. Right. Because the original plan was we're under like UN trusteeship or like Soviet occupation, but we're going to vote. People in both sides of Korea are going to vote on how we're going to reunify the country. But the U.S. just kind of banned South Koreans from like participating in this election, and then that like just hastily threw together a puppet regime that like kind of put a lot of the old pro-Japanese collaborators into like positions of power, especially in the military. If you look at all the generals during the Korean War, they all graduated from the Imperial Japanese Army,
right? And well, it's substantially similar to Vietnam in this regard, right? In terms of a supposed civil war, U.S. is backing the South of it, and there's always a plan for a kind of, well, we're going to let democracy win out, and then somehow the U.S. puts its fingers on the scales to the extent of like there will never be a vote, and therefore, fuck you.
Yeah, and there were like a lot of riots in the 80s. You had the Gwangju massacre in 1980. That's like a lot more recent, where there were like these like pro-democracy, anti-dictatorship protests like got just kind of clashed with local officials. They took over the cities, and then like the military went in and just suppressed it all and like killed a bunch of people. And that was done with the approval of the US.
Right.
So it's like it's called a democracy because the US doesn't just go around and say, oh, it's a puppet regime, it serves our imperial interests. It needs to like have a code word. So it's like that's why it's like the democratic South Korea and the communist dictatorial North Korea. I visited the DMZ from South Korea once, and I guess this is a good anecdote because when you visit the DMZ, you go to like the same place but from different sides.
Right.
If you travel there from South Korea, they're much more like fucking dictatorial than they are like in the North. Like they're like, oh, like don't make if you see like North Korean soldiers, don't make gestures at them, don't wave at them, don't communicate with them, and like you can't and you need to be dressed nicely because if you have holes in your pants or whatever, they're gonna take pictures of you and turn you into propaganda saying that we're poor and that we're a shithole, and but then if you go there from North Korea, they don't care. Like if you see like an American soldier, you're free to flip them off.
So kind of finishing up, I mean, this is a lot, and I'm pretty sure it'll upset a lot of our American audience because they don't want us to talk about it because there's so much anti-communist, imperialist propaganda. And the New Left really had an impact, I think, on most of the American left. And it seems for most Americans, there truly is very few genuine communists. Like a lot of them say communist, but will not follow Marxism or Leninism at all. So I'm curious, like, we already have so much to do to educate people on what genuine communism means and what that looks like. But like, how important is correcting a historical narrative, which is so dominated by the corporate media and the State Department and stuff to you? Like, how important is that versus just making people recognize what actual communism or socialism means?
I think it's very important because a lot of times if you look at the new left, they're okay like when it comes to domestic issues.
Mm-hmm.
But they don't tie. I think their biggest weak point is they don't tie it like into international politics. So they're okay with people like AOC, like saying what they're okay with people like AOC and Bernie Sanders who will make all these sorts of like great sounding promises,
Mm-hmm.
but they don't even deliver them. But I think they want to. I think they want to hold on to the hope. I mean, AOC follows fucking Juan Guaido, but doesn't follow Maduro. It's like one thing if you follow both, you know, you're kind of keeping tabs on both. But it's like if you only follow Juan Guaido, but you don't follow Maduro, shouldn't that say a lot about her political line when it comes to U.S. foreign policy?
Voting with your tweets.
I think I've said this in an article that I wrote before, but Lenin said that imperialism is the highest stage of capitalism, right?
Mm-hmm.
If we accept that to be the truth, which it is, then I would say anti-imperialism is the highest stage of class struggle. Now, I think I've upset some people in the past when I say things like Americans overall benefit from imperialism to varying degrees.
Mm-hmm.
And it gets them really upset because they're saying, are you saying that workers in America are not oppressed and exploited? And no, that's not what I am saying at all. But there are different degrees of exploitation. And it's kind of like how, I think it's something that we need to recognize, as people in the global north, because part of solidarity is recognizing your own position in this system of oppression. I'm not saying that you are the oppressor, but then you need to understand where you are in this complicated web of contradictions. It's kind of like how, we say that even the white working class benefits from white supremacy, right? At the same time, the white working class does suffer from white supremacy as well, because overall it keeps the whole working class weakened. White working class benefits from white supremacy in relation to relative to other working class people in the global north. Wouldn't you agree? So it's kind of like how yes, people will make the argument that imperialism also hurts the American worker, which I agree.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
At the same time, it benefits them in other ways. So it's kind of like how, if you want to resolve white supremacy, you have to recognize, let's say as a white worker, you have to recognize how white supremacy benefits you and how it hurts all workers.
Mm-hmm.
So if you're a working class in the first world, you have to realize how imperialism hurts everybody and how it hurts you as well, and how and why you should stand in solidarity with the with workers throughout the world, but also realize how it benefits you to a certain extent because it's designed to keep you as, for lack of a better term, like a house slave. You see Malcolm X's example, you have the house slave and the field slave.
Mm-hmm.
Well, yeah, and I mean, I think that's where, unfortunately, sort of American liberalism has poisoned the well on our ability to even communicate what solidarity means.
Yes.
Solidarity is, it is mutual. It is generous. And therefore, yes. So to understand perhaps one's position as, say, a white worker in America, or a worker in America in general, is to understand that, yeah, there are certain things that you're benefiting from and other people's suffering,
Yes.
and perhaps being willing to give some of those up. But what I think solidarity extends to, and what people perhaps, this is where the poisoning of the well happens, is not understanding that the solidarity that comes back from, say, workers in the global south or non-white workers who are suffering worse under white supremacy, is that the solidarity then they have with, say, an American worker or a white American worker is to say, look, I understand you weren't trying to do any of this too. That's that, and the idea that like when we replace solidarity with a kind of like liberal notion of charity or a kind of benevolent philanthropic concern, it's where it breaks down because it's very one way.
Mm-hmm. It's it turns out theater, in my opinion.
Of course it is.
This will get me canceled for saying it, but that's what it is.
Yeah.
But
no, of course it is.
Okay, well, I was gonna say, I think you're very good at calling out the bullshit. You say the things in a way that still follows like a Marxist line, where I think people get the liberalism or the postmodernism and are like, oh, so white people or global north people have a little bit more benefit in the world of like international capitalism, so that means they're not the revolutionary.
No revolutionary potential.
Like there's often a trope of like, oh, the white people can't be or like European descent people, whatever, can't be revolutionaries, they can't be Marxist, and it seems they want to just exclude it and make it a smaller and smaller group versus recognizing we should all unite together, especially when you're in the global north. Like we have a lot of
you got some privilege and you're white. You use it. Use it.
Yeah. But they don't want that.
It's like, let's say like a rural white person who might, who is actually a worker, not some like petty bourgeois who calls himself a worker, right? Who might have voted for Trump because he got disillusioned by Obama because Obama didn't deliver any of his promises. Sure. Like he'll probably take you more seriously than me.
Yeah. Well, and that's like recognizing that is sort of wrong and bad doesn't mean that if our struggles are truly interlinked and if we are truly working towards the same thing, which I have to believe we are, then why wouldn't we use every goddamn bullet in our magazine?
It goes down to this. Like a lot of times, I think people in the Western left like these blanket rules because politics is uncomfortable. It's inherently uncomfortable. And if you have to think through a bunch of nuances and complicated contradictions, then, it's at times it feels like you're challenging your own self-identity and your own worldview. So that's why there's that sort of BuzzFeed Tumblr culture where it's like, okay, this. And so there seems to be like in the West, there's a problem where it's like you have people knee-jerking react from like, okay, so there is class reductionism. So then the knee-jerk reaction might be identity reductionism. And then there's identity reductionism. So then there's also the knee-jerk reaction of class reductionism. And then somehow like with liberals, they'll think that like a white worker in the US is more privileged than like a Saudi oil prince because a Saudi oil prince is a POC. Well, and it doesn't work like that.
No, and you may be aware. I mean, we get called class reductionists quite often, and it's a ridiculous claim on its face only because it's like, for the point we just made, we will all be called class reductionists for that. Because we know these are interlocking in some sense, right? I mean, it's like you choose the perfect example, which say that I'm sorry, there are plenty of Saudi oil princes who are doing just fine with relation to capital.
At the same time, the existence of Saudi oil princes doesn't negate the fact that like people like other Saudi citizens are not victims of U.S. imperialism, even if their country is a client state of the U.S.
Right. Yeah. No, there are plenty of people who are not getting any benefit from that particular entanglement. And this is where part of this is American exceptionalism, I think, whereby people like to apply a very American understanding of particularly racial politics, which are, of course, real
American exceptionalism.
Yeah, well, yeah, yeah. I mean, but of course, it's historically contingent and it's unique to these particular historical developments, and so to then try and apply that to every situation in the world and be like, look, I've got my paper bag out. I've identified who the oppressed are. I've done my political analysis. Which, it's by being offensive is horrible.
When liberals do that, they're like the example, like they're so obsessed with like white passing, for example, like, oh, this person is less oppressed because they're not white passing. I mean, I think that's just woke race science. But by that logic, because those same liberals will go around claiming that Uyghurs in China are being genocided and that they're super oppressed, and like they'll equate their situation with like Black people in America or Native Americans, right? Mm-hmm. But by their same standards, though, many Uyghurs are white passing. So which is it?
Well, yeah. No, begging for consistency among the American liberals. It's not, unfortunately, you'll always come up disappointed.
This is why I highly recommend Harry Haywood's book Black Bolshevik.
Hell yeah!
Oh, we have that one.
Got a copy sitting actually not a stone's throw from here. It's, nice. It's a good one.
Because not only is it an autobiography, I think there's something for everyone. It's kind of like that awesome action movie that also has like a lot of like history and like it has even romance or whatever. So then like the action aficionado will like it, but then also like the person who likes dramas and romance and stuff will like it too. But then also the history buff will like it too. It's like one of those things where it's he introduces a lot of theory, but he also ties it in with his own personal political development, but also introduces a lot of history that happened during his lifetime. Like
he's an incredibly compelling character. I mean, it's just his life is interesting.
Yeah.
Yes. So like for example, he'll introduce things like the Marxist-Leninist conception of what nationality is. And then he'll apply that with his own historical research and his understanding of the situation of Black people in America to determine whether Black people in America are just a racial minority who are part of the same like American nation or nationality, or are considered an oppressed nation within the US. And then that was also a point of heavy contention in the Communist Party of the United States during his lifetime. Yeah. And then he also introduced how like white chauvinism in the party and certain capitulatory trends within the party kind of just turned the party into a revisionist and like counter-revolutionary, like reformist kind of a redder version of the DSA in many ways.
Yeah. Well, it's fascinating to say that, only because I'm personally a big fan of Jessica Mitford and her writings and life in the CPUSA. But towards the end, after the Khrushchev letters, she personally blamed William Z. Foster for sort of just not acknowledging this new program they were all getting on board with. He was too centrist, and he was kind of trying to appeal to people. He was trying to appeal to people like some of the older people, but also people like Earl Browder. Right. Well. I mean, so at least in her estimation, right, she would blame him for not being sufficiently. Essentially, they were, I think, sort of post, like 50, late 50s. They started sort of pursuing a project which was very much a reformist one, and going to be focused much more on sort of
getting FDR elected.
Well, that sort of that, but no, more racial politics. Probably a forerunner to things like Native American sovereignty movements and things like that. Mm-hmm. And so he was sort of blamed as being insufficiently sensitive to that. It's fascinating these conflicts or contradictions within, say, American domestic communism play out over and over again. And we can never quite get it right, can we? Because I mean, the answer is probably so in the middle. Liberals
and the bourgeoisie co-opting certain trends also keeps us separated in many ways. I mean, so that's why I think the litmus test to anything is this: is it good for the people? So some people like to treat communism as if it's some sort of lifestyleism. Like, for example, this person is bad because he runs a mom and pop shop that employs like one of his nephews. That makes him petty bourgeoisie, and petty bourgeoisie is bourgeoisie because it has the word bourgeoisie in it. And this person could be like, highly sympathetic. I'm not, this is the thing. Like, that's why I think reading Mao is important, because the way he analyzes class is, okay, like with Trotsky, his problem was, peasants are just petty bourgeoisie. So peasants have no revolutionary potential. And like, I've been reading through Trotsky, and it seems to me that like he just considers kulaks and like poor peasants to be one and the same, because they're all peasants and peasants are all petty bourgeoisie. Whereas like with Mao, in the context of China being a semi-feudal, semi-colony, he recognized that there was potential among certain segments of the petty bourgeoisie and certain segments of even the bourgeoisie in China, the national bourgeoisie, that had an interest in fighting off the imperialists and using that to form a united front. Now, people tend to, I think there's a lot of like just black and white thinking in America in that like, so this is class collaboration. And no, the thing is, these sorts of things need to follow a proletarian line.
Yeah.
So even if you have certain like petty bourgeois members of the petty bourgeoisie who have revolutionary potential, who are allies, who will, benefit you, at the end of the day, they still must follow the proletarian line. And then there's going to be struggle within this unity. There's this sort of conception, I feel, that unity just means we don't criticize each other and we don't struggle with each other. So then it gets really weird, because people like us talk shit about AOC, they're like, you're destroying left unity. Right. Then when those people start repeating lies about, like, I don't know, like calling Maduro a dictator, or calling Hugo Chavez a dead dictator, or saying Kim Jong-un is evil and a baby eater or whatever, I don't know what they say, or saying like, they don't get called out for destroying left unity. So it's almost as if like the idea of left unity, first is it's misunderstood to be the absence of ideological struggle. The other is that there seems to be this sort of expectation of capitulation by us to right opportunists.
Right. Well, and I think I would certainly compliment you on the fact that you particularly on Twitter, you are very sort of full-throated in just articulating exactly what you mean. And I think what so many people get drawn into is two strands of American leftism. One is the we're doing left unity, which means doing whatever the left liberals want, as in spending far too much time being concerned with sort of the optics to left liberals. And then another strand, which is a kind of an ultra one, right? And really comes out of a Trotskyist tradition, or of a kind of like nothing is quite good enough.
You just want to see the world burn.
Yeah, exactly. And so as I say, it's I think how I particularly connected to some of your output. It was being able to walk that line, right? And not making apologies for essentially the sensibilities of American liberals, which is what unfortunately most of the organized American left ends up doing these days.
That's why a lot of people think I'm a dick.
Same.
So, admittedly, though, I can sound like a dick on Twitter, but I mean, once you get to talk to me, I think I'm a little bit less of a dick.
No, you're very nice. I feel like we should probably wrap it up, because we've been going a little while. Tell, please, the good listeners, how do they see more of you on Twitter, and how do they see access your musical outputs?
I guess on YouTube you can search Xiangyu, Xiangyu. Let me see what happens if I open up a private tab and search real quick. Just
I was able to find you.
Yeah, we can link it as well.
Yeah, we'll put it in the.
Yeah. So you can find me on YouTube that way. My Twitter handle is not Xiangyu, NOTXIANGYU. You can find me on Spotify by searching Xiangyu. I tend to use the same profile picture, and
we'll link Spotify and Twitter and things in the episode description for sure. Cool.
Yeah, I think you can pass on Facebook fan page, because that one is just all in Chinese. Because the thing is, like, people in Taiwan don't really use Twitter, so I use Facebook to connect with my Taiwanese audience, and then I use Weibo to connect with my Weibo and Bilibili to connect with my audience in the Chinese mainland.
Nice. Well, we do have a few listeners certainly in Taiwan
and China
and mainland China.
Yeah.
So hopefully they'll be able to find you somehow. Cool. Yeah. Well, thank you so much. We really have enjoyed getting to chat today, and we'll maybe collar you to let us use some copyright violating music to play us out of yours.
Okay. Yeah, it was my pleasure, and thank you so much for having me on. 所以无视人民的媒体不断磨灭我们的声音，资产阶级蒙蔽我们，扭曲历史真理，证明他们恐惧爱憎分明的人民励志胜利，也证明团结的人民力量像是机枪一样，和平是我们的理想。但敌方有不同的立场，资本主义危机即将激荡很多个地方，那是资方会把自由主义面具抛到地上。虽然法西斯看似大力士，但是它其实是资本主义临死挣扎带来的体制，团结意志把它打击死，千万不要失去意志，或者是遗忘历史。面对意识的挫折，不要灰心，世界是不断在变革的。每个希特勒总有一天会遇上他的斯大林格勒。乞讨和平的结果不是被奴役就是死亡，和平和正义就在我们坚定的刺刀之上。The war for peace must go on.